Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining me today because, honestly, we're about to embark on a genuinely mind-bending journey. We're diving into some fascinating research, drawing heavily on the philosophical insights of Dan Weber that really questions the very nature of reality, perception, and what it actually means to be present. Our main goal today? Unpacking exactly why immediate presence feels so undeniably real. And to do that, we're going to have to completely deconstruct how you perceive the physical space around you. So let's jump right in with a question that sounds super simple at first, but really isn't. Where do you end and the world begins? It's arguably the most basic assumption we have about our own existence, right? Our spatially derived presence. We inherently feel like the depth of our physical surroundings provides the whole context for our existence. We feel like we're this neatly contained object, just sitting inside a vast, empty room of space. But what if that boundary is actually just a biological illusion?
Well, that brings us right to Section 1, the spatial illusion.
See, the physical space that feels like it's separating you from your surroundings right now, it might actually just be a highly complex neurological trick. It's played by a specific part of your brain called the posterior superior parietal lobe. Researchers Andrew Newberg and Eugene de Aquili call this the Orientation Association Area, or the OAA. Basically, the primary job of the OAA is to orient you in physical space. It keeps track of which end is up, it helps you judge distances, and crucially, it draws a sharp, definitive line between you and the infinite not you that makes up the rest of the universe. It is literally generating the physical boundary of yourself.
Now here's where it gets wild. What happens when that part of the brain goes quiet? In neurological studies of transcendent states, like deep meditation, there's a noticeably reduced level of neural activity in the OAA. And if your orientation area fails to find that borderline between you and the outside world, well, it just assumes the distinction doesn't exist. Without that boundary, the brain perceives the self as endless, intimately interwoven with absolutely everything. And here is the real kicker. To the person actually experiencing it, this perception doesn't feel like a hallucination. It feels utterly and unquestionably real.
Moving right along to Section 2, how movement shapes space. Researchers suggest that if we only focus on that spatial boundary, we're completely overlooking something vital. Because before your brain can even interpret a boundary, it first has to generate a perspective. You have to remember, your perspective isn't just a fixed camera lens taking static, still pictures. It actually emerges from something called optic flow. Optic flow refers to the shifting movements in your visual scenery that happen strictly because you are moving. This is incredibly foundational. In fact, it's so hardwired that newborn babies, when placed in simulated settings, will detect optic flow and intuitively move their legs as if they're stepping into the world. We have this innate, built-in understanding of how movement and space relate. Your mind uses these subtle movements to anchor your perspective in the present moment.
Now, obviously, we use a whole variety of visual cues to perceive depth. We've got binocular disparity, that's the slight difference in images between your two eyes. We have accommodation, where your eye lenses literally thicken and thin to pull focus. We use occlusion, where things closer to you block things further away, along with relative size and position. But look at the bottom of that list, motion. Motion is completely distinct from all those other static cues for one massive reason.
Motion is temporal. It absolutely requires time. Any depth variations revealed by motion have to be determined across a span of time. Your mind figures out the shape of an object, or even the shape of empty space, based on how its appearance changes over time as you move around it. Think of it kind of like a blind person discovering the shape of a new object. They can't just see it all at once, right? They have to feel out the space it occupies over time. Well, in vision, these changes in appearance only make sense relative to your moving perspective.
And this realization leads us to a massive paradigm shift. Space seems like the ultimate, solid foundation of our physical presence. But as far as perception goes, space is basically a facade. It's a construct that your brain uses to mask the underlying fluidity of your perspective. It's a bit of a paradox, actually. This fluid, constantly moving perspective is fundamentally more real and resilient than the concept of empty space itself, because it's the very foundation that allows spatial perception to exist in the first place.
All right, let's explore what this all means in Section 3. The power of immediacy.
So, if space is ultimately just a navigational tool constructed by the brain, what actually happens when we bypass this spatial illusion? Well, the contrast between the two paradigms is pretty staggering. The spatial paradigm, the way we normally view the everyday physical world, is by definition divisive. It separates you from that thing over there. Neurologically speaking, it's imagined and static. But the temporal paradigm?
the pure, fluid presence of the current moment, that is inclusive. It doesn't divide at all. The mechanism in our brain that renders the world as a spatial environment actually does so at the expense of our own immediacy. To navigate space, we essentially suppress our pure, unbroken connection to the present moment.
So the crucial takeaway here is this. When we meditate, or when we somehow retract our awareness from the spatial world, we are actively dissolving the division between our perspective and the objects around us. Subject and object merge. That extraordinary, expansive connection felt during those states doesn't just feel real, it is real. But it's a connection to the present moment itself, rather than to the physical, spatial world. You are finally experiencing the true, unfiltered foundation of your own presence.
You know that sharp distinction the brain tries to make between the individual and everything else? That really only applies to our imagined spatial presence. Our true immediacy extends way beyond that artificial boundary. The so-called inner and outer worlds are perfectly intertwined within our consciousness. In fact, the outer reality you see only gains its spatial character because your own inner presence is actively projecting it out there through movement and time.
Let's ground this with Section 4, Surfing the Present Moment.
Okay, I know we're dealing with a deeply philosophical, almost ethereal concept here, so let's tie it to a really visceral, dynamic, physical analogy. Spatial perception takes shape within the fluid movement of your visual perspective, very much like a wave changing shape as it hits a reef. First, think of the shape of the wave as representing your optic flow. Just as a physical wave reacts to the contour of the ocean floor, your optic flow reacts to the shape of your surroundings. Second, this surfboard penetrating the water corresponds to your depth perception. A surfboard slicing into the face of a wave is exactly like your mind using spatial features to penetrate the apparent motion of optic flow. By highlighting the temporal, fluid nature of this surfing analogy, we get a practically perfect ontological model for our own minds. This isn't just a fun little comparison. It acts as a subliminal template for the whole spatio-temporal structure of our everyday experience. You are always, constantly surfing the optic flow of your environment to construct the illusion of solid space.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. I want to challenge you, right now, so just look around the room you're in. Are you just seeing empty, dead space separating you from the walls, your desk, the objects around you? Or, armed with this new understanding, can you start to feel the temporal paradigm? Can you sense that what you are actually experiencing is a fluid, immediate connection? It's a continuous flow of visual perspective that intimately binds you to absolutely everything in your field of view. The physical boundary between you and the universe might just be a neurological illusion, but your presence in the immediate now, that is as real as it gets. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope you never look at empty space the exact same way again.